Amen. Buenas tardes. Welcome to Oxnard College. I heard many of you mention this is your first time on our campus. So I just want to welcome you to our beautiful performing arts building. This is a gem in the city of Oxnard. So thank you so much for being here today. My name is Oscar Cobian. I'm the Vice President of Student Development here at Oxnard College. And I had the pleasure of welcoming you to Oxnard College on behalf of our college president, Ms. Sanchez. Unfortunately, President Sanchez was not able to attend today. He sends his regrets. But he's very excited about this opportunity here at Oxnard College. Oxnard College is proud to host this public policy discussion regarding the future of mobility in our city, county, and the state. And I look forward to hearing Jessica Robinson from the Michigan Mobility Institute share how we can work together to address the changing transportation realities and its impact on the local workforce. The Michigan Mobility Institute's website emphasizes the importance of collaboration with community colleges to help support the readiness of new skill trades in Michigan and beyond. Community colleges serve as engines of change in preparing students for new opportunities in technology, such as autonomous vehicle repair, logistics, connected fleet management. In recent months, Oxnard College has worked closely with the city of Oxnard to bring local employers to the campus to engage in discussion on how to increase the skills of our students in preparation for employment in the county, to ensure that our local residents are retained and have job opportunities here in the county of Ventura. This collaboration between the college and the city of Oxnard, local employers, will help ensure we are addressing the changing needs of our local residents. So, I don't want to take too much of our time because I really want to hear from our speaker. But I want to thank the city of Oxnard, the city of Ventura, the city of Thousand Oaks, and the Ventura County Transportation Commission for choosing Oxnard College for this invaluable discussion. As we tell our students and their families, this is your college, and this is your home. Thank you so much.
Good evening. My name is Alex Nguyen. I'm the city manager here in Oxnard. I also want to thank Oxnard College for hosting us, Darren Kettle from the Ventura County Transportation Commission, Alex McIntyre, the city manager of the city of Ventura, and Drew Powers, city manager of Thousand Oaks, for sponsoring this event with us. So, quick reminder, please silence your phones if you haven't done that already. So why are we here? It's very simple. Primary reason. Transportation, as we know it, is going through its most drastic transformation since the introduction of automobiles. So that's happening, and it's going to happen either with us or to us. And for local government, we are all in the midst of making major development decisions that will have lasting impact for decades, if not more than a century. Yet we run the risk of viewing our policies today through a human-driving, automobile-centric, traffic anxiety, congestion anxiety, parking anxiety, through that lens. And that's all going to become obsolete very soon. And if we don't change our perspective, we may be forcing millions of dollars of investment into the wrong places, especially for private parking spaces. And we're definitely not thinking fast enough about the implications of the future of mobility to cities and counties for issues affecting the sales tax base, changing land use, the changing economy for jobs, and so on. So for us, it's important to have these conversations so that we can better understand this disruption that is upon us And this talk tonight is what I hope to be the first in a series of some form of a speaker series here in Oxnard. When I first came here last year, I was told by people, not from here, but from surrounding communities, that Oxnard is not a speaker series town. And I just don't believe that. So thank you for all of you for being here. All right, so our speaker tonight, we're very fortunate to have Jessica Robinson, who is the President and Executive Director of the Michigan Mobility Institute. And she works there to accelerate the development of talents for the growing mobility industry. Starting in 2021, they will offer the first of its kind in the nation and perhaps in the world, a master's degree for mobility. I have no idea what that means, but maybe she'll talk about that. But the effort is to focus on building the mobility talent infrastructure necessary to handle what's coming. She, prior to her gig at Michigan Mobility Institute, she led the next generation mobility efforts for Ford, the car company, for the Ford Smart Mobility division, where she was director of Ford's City Solutions, and that's where I first learned of her. I watched her on a few interviews, and at the time, she was conveying the message to mayors and city managers to stop building parking garages. That wasn't very long ago. But some of us are still building parking garages. So that field-based team worked to understand local priorities and to identify new mobility solutions to meet current and future transportation needs. She was also an early leader in the mobility industry. She scaled Zipcar's innovative car-sharing model, doing marketing in Seattle and locations management in San Francisco and the Bay Area, as well as new cities for the industry in airports across the country. In 2017, she was recognized for her private sector work as the Next City Vanguard, a competitive distinction for top young urban innovators working to make change in cities. She's currently on the advisory board of Planet M. That's an initiative of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, set up to create a partnership between mobility organizations, communities, education institutions, research and development, and government, working together to connect Michigan with those working on innovations that will define the future of transportation. So there's a lot more to her bio, which you can read on their website. I do want to note that she graduated with highest honors from the University of Massachusetts with a degree in anthropology. So with that, I'm going to ask Jessica to join us on the stage and give us her presentation. At the end, if we have enough time, we'll do some Q&A. Thank you very much for being here.
Everyone, and Alex, thank you again for the opportunity to join you here in the community to share this message about the future of mobility this evening. We're testing out the clicker. There we go. Thank you also to Oxnard College, as others have said, for hosting this event, and to community members and elected officials who are here tonight from Oxnard, Thousand Oaks, Ventura, and also for VC and TC for participating in this conversation. I have the chance to visit communities around the world to talk about the future of mobility, and it truly is inspiring to see multiple communities come together for a conversation as important as this one. So thank you again for having me this evening. So when the city manager asked me to come and speak to you all, I didn't know that I was going to have to bring solutions to all of these problems. So I hope you'll bear with me, but seriously, I am very pleased again to be here to share this perspective. And over the next little bit together, I wanted to talk about a number of themes, starting, of course, with autonomous vehicles, but also put that in the context that it is just one of many mobility technologies. It can be a force of change, it can be a force of good, or it can drive our communities apart. Technology really is nothing more than an enabler, so let's think about that too. I'm also going to attempt to define what we even mean when we talk about mobility. It's a word in my industry that's used a lot, but not always defined. We're going to look at what's happening with some of those key technologies in addition to autonomous driving. And I also do want to talk about the work that I'm doing at the Michigan Mobility Institute, thinking about the role of technology and the future of jobs. And while I might not have all the answers, I do want to bring some examples from other communities about how mobility technology is being used today in a number of innovative ways. And I actually have a few examples from right here in your own backyard. So when I travel to different communities, I like to start by looking at what communities say about themselves. So we're going to start right here in Ventura County. I spent some time on your city's websites, and I was really interested in how you talk about yourselves. What's important in the community? As elected officials, what are you out to contribute? And as community members, what are you hoping to see? And I like to look for the themes and things that are similar, as well as the challenges that we all are facing. And what I was really interested here is that the communities that I looked at, there's more similarity than may seem to meet the eye at first. And I included here your neighbors up the coast, as well as a community in Texas, because I wanted to bring a little bit of a different perspective in here to say what is similar and unique to Ventura County and to Oxnard in particular, but also what's shared across these communities. And so what I found is that you prioritize a high quality of life here. It's no surprise. I come to you from Michigan, where I had to escape a snowstorm to get here on time, and I was walking around in shorts this afternoon. You have incredible access to amazing things from Mother Nature, of course the beaches, but many communities here also prioritize open space. There's very strong emphasis on being a business-friendly community, both for large employers but also local retailers. You're a community that values diversity in all its factors, including the strong contributions of the Latinx community. You're making investments in your community, particularly in your downtowns, focusing on walking and being more pedestrian-friendly. And most of the communities here, you also have access and count among your community's thriving ports, which connect you to a world of global trade. But there's also real challenges in the communities as well. There we go. Due to a range of costs. Oh, I hit it too many times. There we go. Due to a range of rising costs, many in your communities that you call neighbors are facing housing instability or potentially even homelessness. And those in need of affordable housing are growing every single day. Traffic and congestion, it's snarling our roads and making it, frankly, a pain to get around. And climate change threatens the communities that you call home as well, whether it's severe weather events or flooding. Now you notice I haven't actually talked about mobility yet, and that's for a specific reason. And it's because I believe that mobility is linked to fulfilling all of these community priorities that you have amongst yourself. But that plays out in a myriad of public policy choices around transportation, but in other areas as well. So as we talk, I'm going to invite you to try and remember a few key areas that I think are important for both policy, prioritization, but as community members as well. And so one that's already been brought up tonight is parking. Yes, I've spoken before about the future of parking garages, and I will again this evening. But it also, policy choices go back to the density, the walkability of our neighborhoods and the housing choices that we make. No city or set of cities is an island. We exist in a regional context. Here, of course, LA is a giant contributing factor, but the whole Southern California coast is going through a tremendous change. And again, what does this mean for the future of jobs, both for today and as these technologies come into the future? So let's tackle mobility for a minute and what we mean when we use the word. I'll invite you, as I go through the next few slides, to think about what mobility means to you. And I've already used the word a number of times without defining it. So I want to present 5 factors that we think a lot about at the Institute to help decode this idea of mobility. So the first is an obvious one. Mobility is about movement. That's a pretty obvious factor. But we thought a little bit more about what is it actually causing. In some cases, we are moving. In some cases, the transportation is happening to something else. For many that I work with on a day-to-day basis who are engineers, they like to talk about mobility being moving from point A to point B. Sometimes it's about efficiency, and that's where it stops. And I think that's a good place to start, but I'll add a little bit more, which is in many of the rooms that I'm a part of, we talk a lot about the movement of people as the focus of mobility. And that's really important, but mobility, I would argue, is much, much more. It's the movement of livestock and our food stock, but it's also about the energy grid that powers increasingly the movement of our vehicles. I'd also have you think that mobility includes the movement of information. In many cases, if you think about the movement of people over time, the reason we actually moved about in the world was to exchange information, to get married, and to share new ideas. And so that's a form of mobility as well. But increasingly, if you're like me, your mobility has changed. Instead of going to stores for everything you need, you probably have those items delivered to your home. In my case, probably every day, which is a bit of a problem. But again, it's fundamentally changed how we interact with the world. But it's not just about online shopping. Mobility brings about fundamental change in the way these systems come together. And for us, we think a lot about the disruptive technologies, yes, but also how they come together through new business models and new services. And yes, things like autonomous driving, electrified vehicles, and increasingly being connected are important. But the way these manifest in the environment creates new ways of value creation and potentially new ways of value capture for the communities where they exist. And mobility also has a community impact. And I'm increasingly seeing a focus on what these new mobility services bring to the communities where they're deployed. And we're seeing an elimination of friction, yes, but there's also new motivators as well. So a focus on sustainability and what might this do to improve the quality of life from an environment perspective. Affordability and equitable access become really important, particularly among the policymakers that I work with. There's another definition here that a lot of people resonate with here in the US around mobility, and that's freedom. It's the ability to get when and where I want, how and where I want. And I think this is important in the future of mobility as well. Sorry about that. And then the last thing is, where does mobility occur? Yes, we're a car-centric community, and so a lot of times we think about mobility as cars, certainly including my adopted hometown of Detroit. I would say you here probably have a little bit broader perspective given the role of the port and also of the trains that run through. But remember, mobility is not just what we see in our communities today, and it's certainly not just going to take place here on Earth. So if you haven't seen yet, I have a distinct perspective on both the future of mobility, but also how these technologies will play out. So I thought it was only fair that I tell you a little bit more about myself. You've had a chance to hear some of my credentials and the work that I've done, but some of my personal experiences shape how I view the future of mobility as well. So I'm avid on Instagram, as you can probably guess from these photos. And what you see here is me moving around the world in a different way. Whether it's getting my motorcycle endorsement so I could get a scooter to ride back and forth to my job at Ford Motor Company, to participating on a West Coast road trip where I was in a convertible and had some of the best views I've ever seen in my entire life. I'm an avid bicycle tourer, and that's given me the chance to see communities up close at a very slow pace and seeing what they value firsthand. I rode from Nashville to New Orleans a few summers ago. I got to see some incredible communities along the ride. And then that photo in the top center is me dressed up as an autonomous vehicle. And I guarantee you this was not a Halloween costume or a bad joke. When I was Ford, we actually produced a research vehicle to understand how members of the community would start to interact with a self-driving car. Because as we do now with drivers, I could wave you by or say stop with hand gestures. Autonomous vehicles can't do that. They don't have hands. So the researchers were playing with this idea of using light signals as a way to interact with pedestrians on the road. There's a video on YouTube from Virginia Tech if you want to check this out. But you can't actually drive an autonomous vehicle with flashing lights today. So what the researchers did was they retrofitted the driver's seat with a costume that looked like a driver's seat. So as the driver, you could sit in it and operate the vehicle, but pedestrians and other drivers couldn't tell that there was someone in the car. And the videos, again online, are truly hysterical here. So as you can see, I've moved around all over the world and enjoy using lots of different modes to get around. But at the end of the day, I would argue everybody in this room, we're actually born to move. And so for me, that idea of mobility as freedom is a really important one. And so let's start to talk about some of those mobility technology trends that are driving the future. As the topic of this talk suggests, one of the biggest changes, of course, coming to our communities is the arrival of autonomous or self-driving technology. Now, to put this in context, autonomous vehicles will change how we get around, but this is not going to happen overnight. But I would like you all to remember that we are at a moment in American history that is quickly becoming known as peak auto. Peak auto is the idea that we are now at the point where we're at the maximum number of new vehicles that will be sold every year here in the US. Every trend that you look at from every single researcher from this point forward shows the number of vehicles being purchased by individuals declining. Now there's a number of reasons for that factor, but we are at peak auto. And one of the things that we do as humans and drivers in cars is run each other over. And I'm sorry to say that that number continues to be very high in our communities around the country. Now, the good news is that this number actually dropped for the first time in the reported data. In 2018, the number of fatalities in vehicle crashes went down about 2%. But it's not all good news, because as efforts have been made to get people to walk and bike in our communities, those fatalities have actually increased. Pedestrians' deaths increased 3.4%, and cyclists increased 6.3% in 2018. So it's, again, not as simple as can be. One of the hopes with autonomy is that we can greatly reduce or eliminate that number of fatalities that we have here in the US every year. Now, these vehicles are computers on wheels. They're very sophisticated sensors on wheels, and they're very expensive. They'll be very expensive to produce, but they're also very expensive to design and build today. And so what we're seeing among automakers is that while initially there was a lot of enthusiasm about vehicles rolling off the production lines in 2020, we're starting to see those companies walk back those numbers a little bit more. And it's due to cost, but it's also due to the hyper focus on safety to make sure that these vehicles are great in the communities when they roll out. We're also seeing alliances and mergers. If you follow this in the news, there's been a number of announcements of car companies starting to come to work together on this topic. Now, I'm going to use a little bit of automotive jargon here, so bear with me. We're going to talk about level 4 and level 5 autonomous vehicles. There's a lot of technical specification, but for all intents and purposes, think about level 4 as a vehicle that is able to operate in a constrained environment, what we call being geofenced. So it can operate in downtown or in a college campus. Maybe it can go between neighborhoods. But what it is not smart enough to do is operate in any environment at any time. Level 5 is the holy grail of autonomous. Anywhere, anytime, on its own. And what automakers are finding, surprisingly, is getting to that level 5 is really hard and really expensive. And so what we're seeing is an increased focus on this level 4, which are these low-speed shuttles in community centers that are operating in known environments. We're also seeing a focus on autonomous driving in commercial vehicles, including heavy trucking on the freeways. And we're starting to see ride-hailing companies start to think about bringing them into their fleets, again, to move people around in some of these neighborhoods by 2025. So the other thing that we're seeing as we ramp up is a focus on nearer-term assisted driving, what we in the industry call ADAS, or a driver assist. And this is things like when you go to change lanes on the freeway, the little light comes on. Or if you have a more expensive vehicle, your steering wheel will vibrate, or maybe your seat will even vibrate. And it's that same technology that's being put into vehicles today that enables the car makers to take down the cost of some of that development and also to get us used to thinking about vehicles as more sophisticated sensors. And so, as a community, how on earth are you supposed to stay on top of all this information? I would encourage you all, and particularly the elected officials, to find ways to stay involved with the industry to understand what's real and what's hype in some of these projections, but also start to think about some of the unintended consequences as these services roll out. There's one view of a future world where many of our ride-sharing services become autonomous, and that certainly will make things easier and potentially safer, but it may start to pull ridership out of our public transit systems and favor riders that can pay for these private services versus community members that can't. And so pricing becomes a very important mechanism here, as well as taxation. Let's talk about electrification next. This is another major trend that we're seeing driving the future of mobility. This is another trend that was initially slower to roll out, but we're actually starting to see acceleration now. Here in California, more than anywhere else, we have Teslas driving around. And today in the US, we have 1 million electric vehicles on the road. When I was at Ford, was part of the announcement of our commitment to electrification, and I stood on stage and talked about an electric Mustang and an electric F-150. And I'm pretty sure no one in the room believed me when I said we were going to launch those things. But again, if you follow the news, you'll see that Ford shared just last week here in Southern California the first fully electric Mustang, and it's still a pretty badass car. And the other thing companies are looking at is the deployment of chargers, but also the location of chargers. And so from a policy perspective, there's a real important question here, which is, do we need our electric vehicle charging network to be in our homes, where the vehicles that we own can charge them overnight, or do they need to be in more dense urban environments where a shared fleet of vehicles goes to charge during the day? And there's very different implications on our power grid depending on which way this rolls out. I'll also say here that the shift to electrification has profound impact on gas tax, if that's not already obvious. We're starting to see a number of communities, including here on the West Coast, look at a vehicle mile travel tax instead of a gas tax. There are some challenges there as we transition, because it again may favor or punish those that are early adopters for electrification. But if you envision a future world where there's electrified vehicles in a shared fleet, shifting to a vehicle mile travel tax versus a gas tax is a way for communities to continue to have a revenue source to maintain roads and other infrastructure in the environment. We use another acronym here, which is V2X. If you're not in the smart transportation world, you'll have no idea what I just meant by that. The idea is that we and our vehicles and our infrastructure increasingly are connected to one another. So I mentioned this idea of a car as a computer on wheels, in effect today, for those of us that have the mobile phone in our hands at all times, we're also a connected node in this network. But there's a really important technology decision that the US is facing right now, and it's about the protocol for how these vehicles will talk to each other into the infrastructure. And I will spare you most of the details and most of the fight, other than to say it has profound impact on the cost and the rollout of infrastructure in the community. Today, the only thing that's legal is a form called DSRC, which is a radio band for the vehicles to talk to one another. What the industry is now looking at is leveraging the 5G network that powers our smartphones and everything else that we have to promote this connectivity. But the band and the range that's necessary to do this has not been approved by the FCC, so it's not legal. So many communities, including in Michigan, we're actually going ahead and installing that DSRC technology because we based that on a policy decision 5 and 10 years ago, and we're still going ahead. So consider that in your communities as well. And then the last point on connectivity is I'll have you remember that many in our communities do not have that mobile phone in their hands at all times. Maybe they don't even have high-speed internet in their homes. And so as we shift to these on-demand services, how do we bring the rest of our community members along in this journey that's so reliant on mobile devices? One of the other areas that we're seeing driving tremendous change right now is in a new focus of street use and street design. And this is an opportunity to think about how we use that publicly funded space for the things that matter in our communities. We're seeing, of course, new things like those little scooters that are buzzing around many communities now, but also services like Lyft and Uber. We're also seeing public transit agencies start to get very creative and partner with private operators to fill in complete zones that aren't well served by those big buses running empty through our neighborhoods today. And there's this increasing focus on walkability, as I mentioned. But again, community members will only continue to move about if they feel safe and connected. I mentioned package delivery, and then I mentioned I was an avid online shopper. This number is only going up. And yes, it's Amazon, but it's increasingly services that connect shoppers to the stores that are in our communities here, both to reduce the transportation costs, but also to speed up the time to items in our home. I was actually just in New York yesterday where I had a chance to meet with real estate developers, and one of the things that they're starting to think about is properties as an intra-city logistics node. So yes, if you live there, you're getting picked up and dropped off, you're bringing your groceries in, but maybe they're being delivered. Maybe other services come into the building, and so the building itself becomes much more open and engaged with the community. Curbside parking has a chance to be fundamentally changed here. In most cities, roughly 1/3 of the urban environment is dedicated to vehicle use on the street. That's both the roads, but also the parking. And so when you think about the value of real estate, do you actually want to continue to use that for car storage? Retailers and malls may be fundamentally changed as we shift to online shopping. And we're also seeing companies as traditional as Home Depot, where you get all of your hardware supplies, but they have pickup lockers now for those online shoppers. I want to talk lastly about UAVs or drones. We're starting to see those in the community as well. And there's a policy decision here to be made both at the federal level but also at the city level. And today, these small vehicles and larger ones can only be flown when you can see them, or you have to receive permission and exception from the FAA. The next phase of development with drones is to enable what's called beyond line of sight flying, which is basically it's off and you can't see it. Maybe it's still being driven or maybe it's autonomous. But we're actually seeing cities and communities now start to define the flyways that they want these vehicles to operate in to prioritize green space, consider noise, and there's different rules potentially for emergency vehicles going to a fire versus someone delivering a burrito to my house. So I want to take a few minutes now to talk about another way that technology trends are impacting communities. And this is the one that's near and dear to me, which is about jobs. And I also promise this is the slide with the longest amount of words on it in my whole presentation. But the gist here is simple. It's that there's a lot of inefficiency in our transportation systems today. And if autonomous technology or other mobility technologies can unlock this inefficiency, there's a tremendous amount of money that can be put toward any priority in our community, but certainly including transitioning folks whose jobs will be disrupted by this technology. Now, this organization, SAFE, they focus on the transition of the underlying fuel. They do promote electrification, but that's not the only benefit here. They also looked at congestion, the time that we and our goods lose because they're sitting around. They look, again, at the cost of crashes in our communities, and again, the value of our time and the inefficiency of sitting around. And so they estimate nationally by 2050, 50, that the amount that will be unlocked is $756 billion. Now that is a crazy number, and even if there's a rounding error that is still unlocked as value in our new mobility systems, that is value that can be put toward other priorities that we want to see, again, including jobs. And so I would like to argue that we should put some of that toward jobs. As Alex mentioned, I am focused now on training and education. And when I started this work, we looked at the mobility trends that I'd already took you through: autonomy, connectivity, electrification, smart infrastructure, and the fact that everything is becoming digital. And in the industry, we looked at ourselves and said, well, what do we know about how the technologies we're bringing to the market will actually change jobs for the people who start to use them in the communities? And it turns out there weren't very many numbers on this. And so we did some research on our own in partnership with the Boston Consulting Group, and the numbers that we found are pretty significant. Those 4 trends alone, we believe in the US, will create at least 115,000 new jobs in the next decade. This is not 10 years from now. This is now through the next 10 years. And these, again, are jobs directly created by those mobility trends. They're second and third order effects for our lawyers and our trainers and folks that take care of our children as these new jobs come to market. But it's not just affluent professionals with fancy college degrees. These are also skilled trade workers that will repair these vehicles, that will build these vehicles, and will make sure that they operate safely in our communities. Now you may be asking, don't we already have a number of great programs that train people in this, including right here at Oxnard College? I would say yes, but the simple fact is this: the gap is huge. If we look at the number of people that will graduate over the next decade versus the number of people that we believe we need, there's a 6x gap. And so even if we bend the curve and close 2 or 3x gap here, it's going to take everybody to work on this together. So that's why I want to talk about the future of jobs as well. And so at the Michigan Mobility Institute, as was already mentioned, we're really focused on accelerating the development of people for these jobs. And we're doing that by bringing the industry closer to education than, frankly, I think we've seen before in a while. If you think about engineering, if there's any engineers in the room, you'll remember history here, which is that we didn't have mechanical engineers before we had the steam engine. We certainly didn't have electrical engineers before we had electrical systems. We didn't have aerospace engineers until we tried to fly. I would argue that we are in the dawn of a new type of engineer, which is the mobility engineer, which is someone who has the technical background, but also understands the context of how these services will be deployed in the environment in which they operate. And so that's what we're focused on as the Institute. And we're really starting to work in 2 areas. The first is the creation of that new Center for Advanced Mobility in partnership with one of our local colleges, Wayne State, which is based in the heart of Detroit. And so we're working with the engineering school to revamp their curriculum to offer these new degrees, everything from mobility itself to connected autonomous systems. We'll be launching a Master of Robotics in the fall of next year. But we're also leading a new approach, and we've brought together some of the leading industry companies into an employer collaborative. So they're actually jointly partnering together to solve the talent gap that they're seeing in the industry. Now, in some cases, these are suppliers that are used to working together, but in other cases, we actually have competitors sitting in the room together saying, here's what we need, here's what we need, with the idea that a rising tide can lift all ships. And my hope, as we get this model figured out, is it's something that becomes replicable. So partners around the country and hopefully around the world who are interested in bringing this world-class education to their communities can borrow and learn from what we've done. We're here to talk about the future, and I promise we'll do that now. So for those of you that are focused on cities and urban planning, you may have seen a version of this photo in the past. And the image talks a lot about the different types of services that will come into our community over the next couple years. Yes, autonomous shuttles, ride sharing, same-day delivery, smarter parking so you can pay by your phone, potentially drive-through ordering in a different way when there's no driver at the wheel. And so we think of this kind of urbanist utopia in some people's view about where mobility is going to take us. But I'm going to ask you to look at this same slide again in a slightly different way and recognize that there's something ongoing here. And there's people in this picture too. Remember, I'm an anthropologist. And so people here are not just consumers and users of these new goods and services, but they're actually the ones with these jobs as well. So on the public side, we might have policy experts who are actually learning to use data in a different way, doing urban planning to plan for autonomous vehicles. For a long time, we're going to see these safety drivers in autonomous vehicles as they continue to learn to operate in the roads. We're going to see change in insurance. That will probably mean there's a new kind of insurance broker along the way as well. Those sensor technicians that will make sure that when the vehicle goes through mud and has something splashed on it, that it's actually clean and ready to go. I grew up in a town where I had a milkman. I wonder whether we'll have that type of service again, someone that meets the stuff that's coming to us at the curb to bring it that last little way. Energy grid, someone who's thinking about managing and balancing the grid in a completely different way and protecting all of it. What happens when we put our kids in autonomous shuttles? The vehicle might do its part, but if anyone has kids, you know, when you put two in a car together, someone needs a babysitter. And so there'll probably still be someone in the vehicle if we're moving kids around in this way. And then who's managing all of the bigger form of freight that's moving around in our communities? And I want to add a little bit more context here to some of the people behind these changes today. And these are actual people that I've met and worked with in my career over a change in mobility over the last decade. So the first person I want to tell you about is Calvin. Calvin is a Chinese-American entrepreneur up in the Bay Area in San Francisco. And he's decidedly not in future technology. Calvin owns his family repair shop, and he's been a mechanic doing oil changes and tire changes for his whole life. But I met Calvin when I worked at Zipcar and was looking for places to park our shared vehicles in neighborhoods so that people could walk to them. And what we found out was Calvin, had one of the most desirable locations in San Francisco because it was on a very busy street, well served by public transit, but it was being used, underutilized frankly, for its original purpose, which was working on cars. And so I met Calvin when I walked into a shop one day with a coffee in hand and said, hey, can we talk about using your space in a different way? And as you can imagine, in San Francisco, Calvin had been approached by a number of real estate developers, probably who looked like me and just wanted to buy his property. And he wasn't ready to give up yet. So what we decided was that I could lease his parking spaces. In exchange, he would work on them, he would take care of them, and we both got what we needed. Except if you think about it, Calvin, the next generation, his children will not be working. That will be a new condo building. And his role will have changed either from mechanic to a landlord or potentially to a very happy retiree. The next person that I want to talk about is Corey. That is not Corey, but it is someone that Corey works to support every day. Corey runs a startup that's focused on improving safety of the roadside workers that are out on our streets every day. And I met Corey as part of my work at a startup accelerator where we were trying to help him grow his business more quickly. And he started this work because he realized that our emergency responders and the Comcast and the other technicians that are in our communities are more likely to die or be injured going to the scene or while parked on the scene of an emergency than due to the emergency itself. And so he said, there must be a better way. And so they're actually now working with the Department of Homeland Security to create a new protocol so that when a vehicle is parked and the lights are on, or they're even en route to a response, it will actually send an alert out through a number of services, including directly to your in-dash radio or to Waze if you're using one of those navigation apps. Now, Corey is a startup guy. He's got a man bun, and he says bro a lot. He is not somebody that ever would have been in the future of mobility, except that he saw a problem for the people that he cared about, which is the fact that they were being injured and killed on the side of the road. And the last person I want to introduce you to is Allison. Now, that's not Allison either, but that is, in this case, someone on Allison's team. And she's an amazing woman who sits on my advisory board. And Allison is literally living the cutting edge of mobility technology. So as a young woman, she studied electrical engineering. She worked at General Motors on the Bolt. And then she later worked in General Motors on their venture capital group, investing in the future of mobility. But she left that company to found May Mobility, which is a low-speed autonomous vehicle, which is moving people around today in a number of communities in Michigan and also in Ohio. And so in her short career in the past 15 years, she's gone from learning how a vehicle is designed to actually deploying something in the environment. And so as we proceed into some ideas that you might take here into the community, I want to use some specific examples of how quote-unquote disruptive mobility offerings are actually being designed and harnessed by communities to achieve those priorities that we started with: quality of life, prioritizing being family-friendly, having strong downtowns, supporting our diverse communities, including those that are aging. And so this one here, it's a parking garage. I'll give you the spoiler alert. And what we're seeing is that with these investments in very expensive real estate, developers and communities around the country are trying to think about this differently. To put this in context, I'll share a few numbers with you. The first is that our private parking in the US takes up a lot of space. It's 25,000 square miles if you were to lay it out. If you're not good with square miles, like I'm not, that's okay. It's the size of West Virginia that we have allocated to parking today and peak car. So do we want to continue to build this space? And if we do, because our communities are clogged by congestion, one of the questions is, how do we change in the future? In LA, again, just down the road, 13% of the whole city land is parking, right? These are crazy numbers. And so it's not really a question of if we need parking today. We do. But the question is how much, where, how can it be reused, and for how long? And I'll tell you something crazy. I mentioned I came from Detroit, right? Even in Detroit, our city council is actively considering eliminating the parking minimum for new projects because we are seeing such a shift in demand for the way our cities are built. And it's not just because of autonomous vehicles. We only have 3 shuttles in all of Detroit riding around today. It's because increasingly our community members are using other ways to get it around as well. And so this example here is at Northwestern University, and it's a parking garage that has actually been designed to convert to classroom when the time comes and the university no longer needs this space. Yes, it costs more, and yes, it requires commitment and creativity to do it, but it is possible, and there's lots of examples of this happening all around the country right now. The next thing I want to talk about is housing. Here in Southern California, I don't have to tell you, housing is one of the things that is most expensive in our personal budgets. Housing and transportation are inextricably linked. Where we live and where we work choose and dictate how we get around on a day-to-day basis. And with increased distance, for many of us have fewer options. And so communities are thinking about how to build housing closer to home, right? And increasingly housing that's affordable for those in our communities that have good paying jobs, the workforce housing of the future. And yes, it's about addressing homelessness as well, but this is actually about basic affordability. And so the example that I wanted to share here with you is from Breckenridge, Colorado. If there's any skiers in the room, you know this is a beautiful resort community up in the mountains. But they realized that their workers were living 50 miles away because they couldn't afford to live in the community. And so looking at that housing shortage, what they did was they prioritized some very creative indirect subsidies for a developer that wanted to build affordable workforce housing. They waived their inspection fees and their permitting fees. And in the case of this project, that was over $1 million. And when you talk about changing the economics of development, $1 million of cost for a developer is pretty significant. And so this project is multi-phase and multi-use. So they started with single family, but they've added mixed use and attached housing as well. And there's also live and work areas. And of the 120-ish units that were initially built, about 90 were allocated for locals. So not the tourists, not those that could afford to fly in and out to go skiing. They also capped appreciation on the property, but also took into account if median wage rose more quickly, that the value of those properties could go up. And the best thing about this community is it's a 15 to 20 minute walk to downtown. And so one of the really important things to consider here as it relates to policy is the cost of infrastructure to support the locations where we put housing. There's an organization called the Urban Land Institute, and they took a look at the cost of delivering all of the other infrastructure to housing, depending on where it's built. It's a little wonky, but I'm going to go there anyway. So for one housing unit on a 4-acre parcel, so this is a nice suburban parcel, the cost of a city delivering infrastructure to that parcel is $90,000. If you take that same acre, slice it into 4, and look at just 1 acre. If you put 30 units, which is relatively dense, on that site, it's $10,000 per housing unit, right? So there are some trade-offs here to consider, but for those, again, who are thinking about public policy decisions, there are some real infrastructure cost benefits by focusing on this workforce housing as well. Let's talk about public transit. It's something, I know we've got members from VCTC here, thank you again. Public transit is really important in this future mobility question. This project is not in an East Coast or West Coast dense urban city. It's in Phoenix, Arizona. This is Valley Metro. And what they looked at was the way their riders were getting around using their mobile app. And like many transit agencies, they built a V1 version of this app which let you figure out which bus or which train you were going to take, but that's all it did. And so what they actually did was they got a grant from the federal government to build a better app. And what this app will actually let users in the community do is plan those rides, but also book those tickets. But what's cool is it's not just the tickets in the public transit network, it also connects to rides on some of those private services, including ride sharing like Lyft and Uber. So you can book a seamless trip based on any number of personal factors. Is expense most important to you? Is time most important to you? And the other thing that's great is they built it on an open data structure, so other transit agencies around the world can actually use what's built to bring out new systems into their communities. I mentioned Detroit and its relationship to parking is changing, right? So this is downtown, and this is a new service that our regional transit agency launched. It's called FAST. And the idea here is connecting our suburban communities to our workplace centers through limited bus stops. And so in this case, they run from the suburban neighborhoods into downtown. And instead of a stop every few blocks, because the region is built on a grid, they stop every mile. But they also have Wi-Fi, the seats are different, the experience, frankly, is very different riding one of these buses. They also eliminated another major friction point in a lot of communities, which is as the transit moves from the county into a city, many times you're forced to stop and have to transfer. These buses zip straight on through. And the fare is the same as any other fare for any city bus or regional bus in the area. And Detroit actually just launched a new app as well where you can book a seamless trip using your mobile device. I want to talk about ride sharing because I've mentioned it a couple times. But I'll have you think about ride sharing a little bit differently, which is, jumping into an Uber or Lyft to go out on a Friday night. There's members of our community that might benefit from access to a different form of ride sharing, but aren't really ready to be hailing things on their mobile devices. Not a promotion, but an example of a company I wanted to share. And it's a company called Go Grandparent. And the idea is very simple. We already have a network of ride-sharing providers out in our communities, but they're not comfortable using their mobile phone. So anyone, including an elderly parent, can actually call from a landline in their kitchen and say, I'd like to go to the doctor's. And someone has set up in advance, behind the scenes, often a family member, the payment and the preferred destinations. But if you're going somewhere new because you're going to lunch with friends, that's okay too. And then a real human on the other side of the phone says, okay, I've got you, types it in to Lyft or Uber app, it's not that fancy, and then the vehicle arrives to take your mom where she wants to go. This is something that can fundamentally change the way older folks, or again, those who don't have access to mobile device in our communities, can get around. It also is a really nice, I've used this myself, form of transparency to make sure those that you care about actually got where they're going. But most of us that are using ride sharing today probably are not the lady we have here on the screen. There are those of us that are used to using our mobile phone to access the world. And it's changing the demands on the infrastructure in our communities. And increasingly, policymakers are thinking about how to share in the increased adoption of these services. And so, again, just next door, LA County is actually actively considering adding a ride-hailing fee for each trip that is conducted on the platform. There's no additional fee today. This could go through as early as next year. It's driven in part by the arrival of the Olympics, but not entirely. The rapid adoption is actually what's changing this year. In cities like Chicago and Washington, D.C. and New York, there's actually new taxes that have been passed. In New York, they have a nearly 9% tax that's added to every ride to fund infrastructure and other improvements. And in New York, they've actually added a second tax to fix the subway infrastructure deficit that they have. Now again, there's some unintended consequences here. If you slap a 10% tax on a service for community members that don't have a lot of flexible income, it could actually prevent people's ability to use these services. The other area of mobility innovation is something that decidedly does not look like mobility at all. And it's groups of policymakers sitting around a table. And so this is actually the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And along with the National League of Cities, these are forums where elected officials, policymakers, and city staff can actually come together to share challenges in your communities and best practices. And I've had the chance to work with both organizations and would put this to the group. If you're an elected official, consider engaging. If you are a community member and your elected official says, I would like some budget to attend this conference, understand why. And it's because the challenges that you're facing here, yes, reflect the unique challenges in the community, but we're not alone. And so there are networks of people that are trying to get together to solve these problems. And I mentioned there's some innovation going on right here in the community as well. And so as many of us drive on the freeway every day, we use an app. And many people probably use Waze. Waze is something else in addition to reporting where there's a speed trap or a vehicle parked on the side of the road. Waze is actually an incredibly powerful data gathering tool for public policymakers. And did you know that just in September, Ventura County Board of Supervisors actually approved a partnership with Waze to join what they call their Connected Citizens program. And so this is a way for policymakers to actually gain access to data and also publish data back to Waze. And it can be used for things like understanding infrastructure usage and looking at frequent points of congestion. It can also be used for publishing construction alerts so that people don't pile up behind the orange cones and get frustrated and call the DOT. It can be used to prioritize and clear roads for crisis response and to move people efficiently and effectively out of danger. They're also installing beacons in areas of low connectivity, including tunnels, to make sure that people have continuous access. They're looking at wildlife management and areas where there's a high frequency of impacts and crashes. And they're also using the app to encourage carpooling, because if you've already got the app open and you've got a few extra seats, why not meet someone and or make a few bucks to pay for gas along the way? And so as we kind of move into the discussion phase here, I want to come back to this, which is pretty simple, but it's important to remember because it's so easy to forget. And it's that mobility innovations are nothing more than enablers. And it's really up to us as community members to determine how they're adopted and deployed. And so the question at hand is, what will you choose to do? What policy choices will you make in this era of new mobility? Will you prioritize walkable communities and affordable workforce housing? How will you plan for infrastructure costs in an increasingly changing world? Will you focus and plan on growth in city centers? Or will you look at underutilized areas in the community that could be reused for something else? How will you do transit planning that best serves the community today while accounting for the arrival of these new services? And can you support your procurement officers in coming up with new ways to work with these private operators while holding them accountable to make sure that these services meet the needs of everyone in the community? We've got changing consumer behavior dictating how, when, and where we shop. And last and least, it's the future of jobs. What will we be doing to make a good quality living in the future? So I would encourage everybody in the room, whether it's policymakers or members of the community, to use data to make these decisions. We have more tools available to us than we have ever had before. There's private data sources, and you can put other programs in place as well. And remember that, yes, those autonomous vehicles, they are starting to roll out now. It's taking a little bit longer than we thought at first. But for community members, the choices that you make now will shape the future because you're making 15, 20, and 30-year bets about what you want your community to be in the future. And so think about the policies that you want to put in place to make sure these disruptions create the community that you want. Thank you. Or as a region coming together is really important.
One last little case. We've had drones shut down.
Mm-hmm.
We've had drones shut down firefighting efforts here because when it's out in the wild, I don't know how we control it, and I don't know, I mean, you have to go to the punitive side at that point. But all of those sorts of things seem like they are already part of your conversation that you're having.
They are, and they should be. Oh. Thank you.
Hi, Donald Nielsen, City of Thousand Oaks. Here just as a private citizen, actually. With the autonomous vehicles, and I can actually see that encouraging more and more people to take their own personal cars. And then also with the, you were mentioning the ride-hailing apps, with everything else. I know New York and San Francisco, they've already had their studies, and they've already proven that because we've had the advocates of the ride-hailing apps, they've actually seen, I think they were saying about 25% increase in their traffic, or the traffic in the cities, is actually just because of those ride-hailing apps. Whereas the push in planning, I know, is to try and reduce the amount of traffic and create these walkable environments, but the shift to the autonomous vehicles and increasing more ride-hailing apps, wouldn't we just be seeing more congestion and incursion of congestion on the limited infrastructure that we have? And then kind of the second part to that is, wouldn't kind of a push towards this more autonomous realm be a disincentive for cities to invest in traditional mass transit, or expanding the rail networks and everything else, which are much more efficient in transporting people across cities and across regions?
Absolutely, could be. Yes, you raise very important questions. In transportation planning, of course, there's also this idea of induced demand, which we've largely looked at from the freeway capacity. So if you do your studies and you say our traffic is going to be X by Y year, you build the freeways to that, you're already at that full demand before the year comes. I think there's a similar dynamic at hand, which is as long as the price is reasonable and there's perceived low level of friction, yes, people will continue to make these choices. But I also think, you know, here in Southern California, it's already broken. And, you know, I don't sit here to say you should bring more taxes into the community, but there are mechanisms that, you know, again, LA is a good example in terms of congestion pricing, of a way to gate access to certain areas at certain times. It can be done in other ways too. You know, the pickup and drop-off zones. Some cities are actually looking at constraining or restricting where they are, so they're not on major throughputs, they're on the side streets. There's new software being developed that a city could actually use to charge for a pickup and drop-off, similar for the way we pay to park our car on the city street today. But I mean, I come back, unfortunately, to the similar response to the prior answer, which is it's going to take being engaged in these conversations to figure that out. Because there are certainly lots of people working on autonomous vehicles that will tell you, it's going to be great, I can commute 2 hours and sleep in the back of my car. That may be true in like 2075 or 2050. Where we're going to see the technology roll out first is in these urbanized environments. So my hope is that because of the complexity of the level 5 driving, we will actually see more operators start to focus on these low-speed multi-rider services that, if priced correctly, could actually continue to take people out of their cars. But it's not a foregone conclusion.
Thank you. And then I have, one additional question. This may be a shocker. I know you had brought up the slide. It was about a parking garage. It was the parking garage. In order to convert a parking garage into usable space, you have to plan ahead of that in advance. How can you actually convince municipal leaders to go forward and spend those tax dollar monies for a potential conversion that may or may not happen? And also, we've just I've worked on a prior project where I was proposed parking structure, and the actual parking experts, they were saying, well, the next best use for parking structure is road base. It's not worth it to actually go through and spend the money to do a conversion, because it may not happen due to changes in building codes further down the line.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, there's two. One is the policy around parking minimums, and then the other is general zoning. So I'm going to assume we're talking about an environment where the zoning is already in place to switch uses in a downtown environment. I think, again, as private citizens, be vocal about the fact that if, particularly for municipal parking, those projects are being considered, go and ask those hard questions of your leaders at the community. But I will tell you again, I mentioned this real estate developer conference. There were multiple people on the panel with me. Developers said that they didn't want to build these parking minimums either because it's expensive, they know it's not going to be utilized, and it actually detracts from the long-term value of that property. In terms of conversion, it does require some planning, which requires additional architecting up front. That particular one is kind of, rustic. It's not really fancy inside, and it's been designed with level floors and some other things. So I think the conversion in that one is a little easier. That architect is also doing this design where you can kind of swap out pods over time and so convert parts of the building. That doesn't account for drastic changes in building code for, let's say, earthquake guidelines or something, but there are a number of firms that are doing this work now. They're right here in Southern California too. So it's not a question of can it be done, it's this question of is there the will to do it? And I'll be honest, in some cases, a parking garage as part of a development is still really important today. But I think the message that I would have is make that choice intentionally, because there's probably a better way to do it even now. Our largest developer in Detroit has actually decided they don't want to build any more parking garages downtown because it's not the best use of the land. And again, build a network of people that want to have this discussion together. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for coming. My question is actually very similar to what you were just talking about. So I guess I'm curious more from the policymaker angle. Single-family home zoning and parking requirements are pretty prevalent here in Oxnard and Ventura County. And there are places that, as you mentioned, Detroit is looking at ending parking minimums. Minneapolis has already done it. They've already also ended single-family home zoning. So I'm curious if, and other places too, like I think Buffalo has ended parking requirements. So have you found in your discussions with policymakers that certain arguments are more compelling, or what sort of led those changes to happen in some places and not others? Feel free to direct your response to the policymakers.
Well, raise your hands, right, so I know where you're hiding. I think a lot of times where I've started to see that change happen is go and see. And in my experience, there are stakeholders in the community that will fund a trip. So, if there's a particular development or neighborhood or form that you're looking at here, again, yes, the community is unique, but it's probably been done somewhere else. And so, find that architect, find that developer, go talk to the people that live there, go talk to the council members and the mayor who had to fight that battle. That Breckenridge example, one of the fights that they had was about the street width. And their designers at the city said, no, our policy is, 12 feet or whatnot. And they said, no, we want to slim the lanes so that it'd be a lower speed and feel like a neighborhood. That particular kind of like downtown neighborhood form also doesn't exist in the mountains in Colorado. So this was a departure for them, but they went and they looked in other places and saw that it could happen. And then I would say, look at again at the needs of the community. And in that case, the affordable housing was still $300,000. But it was was necessary to, again, keep people in the community that were really important to have as part of the fabric. So that's where data becomes important. When we're making these choices, what are changes that have already been made elsewhere, and then also who's going to benefit from those uniforms. Yeah. And the data on this one, I would just say, is a national trend, is that people want to live in walkable urban places, ideally connected to a downtown, but not necessarily.
Hi, I'm Brendan Burns. I'm from Oxnard and currently living in Camarillo. I'm a Master of Public Policy student at Pepperdine, and as somebody who's a researcher in public policy, what are some different authors, books, or resources that you know of that people that are studying policy can look into to get to know about this more?
That's a great question. Hopefully the Michigan Mobility Institute will continue to put out exciting work. MIT is still doing really interesting work out of their media lab, and again, interdisciplinary. This is a really good question. I'll get really wonky on you without the benefit of the whole room having to hear it after if you'd like. But I would say, there's a number of really good books right now, including, I don't know the title, but it's by a guy named Sam Schwartz, who has looked at congestion in a number of cities. Donald Shoup, who's here in California, has looked at the impact of housing and traffic in communities. And then there's actually a tech blog that I love called Axios. They have some programming, I think it's on Netflix or HBO, but it's very easy bits of information about where this technology is going. And then conferences, actually right here in LA is a conference this week called Commotion, where people from around the country are coming together to continue to ask these questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. I find some of these developments exciting. One of the things that has surprised me is the lack of policy courage in tackling some of the low-hanging fruit. For example, with rideshare driving, part of the paradigm is the driver never leaves the car. The passenger meets them. If they're not there on time, the driver may go around the block. The point is, they never have to park, get out of the car. But then we have the problem with basically lawless behavior that's pushed by the companies with delivery, just like it was with scooters, where there's no policy to regulate it. And the essence of the delivery service that rideshare, DoorDash, and all the other Uber Eats do is the driver breaks the paradigm by having to park the car and leave the vehicle, go find their way into someone's building, an apartment, deliver the thing. They go through the same thing at the restaurant, and that creates a burden on the city's infrastructure. It strikes me that our government has the power to regulate this, to say you cannot offer a service that breaks that driver stays in the car paradigm because you're imposing an unreasonable parking burden on the city. And by the way, I am visiting here from the Bay Area, so I've seen what this turns into in San Francisco and in Berkeley, where basically the rideshare delivery drivers have to break the law with every delivery almost and take a gamble on whether the police looks the other way, while at City Hall, nobody is deciding to do the simple thing and say the recipient, the purchaser of the pizza has to come to the curb to get it, just like the passenger has to come to the curb. How do you see the politics of this, and is there a political will to implement the simplest of rules like this?
Good question. So I'll start with the enforcement piece, which is, let's assume there's a will and the policy in place. Unfortunately, for many of the laws that we have in our books, to enforce them every single time, as humans, there's going to be a cost. And so there's a trade-off there that we make. If it's automated, maybe it's rules-based. That doesn't excuse the behavior. I spent some time in the Bay Area, and I saw...
Not meaning to interrupt, but I guess the gist of my question is a regulatory measure to redefine the service as driver never leaves car, buyer comes to the curb, which would eliminate the door delivery and the parking burden.
Yep.
Can the service be redefined politically?
I think it could be, if that's a priority. I would argue even then, it may not get the full benefit that you're looking at, which is if the driver's in the vehicle and it's stopped in the bus lane, which is often where it happens, it's still clogging traffic. So San Francisco, we're actually seeing that the city push traffic off of Market Street entirely, and the pickup and drop-offs and things are on those side streets. So that is something at a community level you can say to the local operators, hey, we really need you to specify a designated drop-off zone here. But you know, the human nature will take some time to overcome, so I don't think that's overnight. On the political will, I guess the other thing I would say is, you know, no one necessarily wants to be number one when you're elected, but being a quick and second fast follower is really important. So there are communities that have started to shape where that pickup and drop off occurs. I think in the long run, where we actually go is we need to design our places for those interactions between a vehicle and a curb in a different way. You know, it used to be horse and buggy that would pull through. If you were lucky enough, your driver would pull through and drop you off. I think a lot of those services will interact that way in the future. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jeremy Meyer. I'm actually a planning commissioner here in the city of Oxnard, so I'm a keen interest here. And so one question I have is I'm curious, what are some tools that we can use and that, you know, the department, the planning department that we oversee and we support and we collaborate with can use to apply these? You know, every meeting we're facing parking questions, and you know, at previous meetings I said, well, you know, perhaps in 10 years we'll be mostly an autonomous society, so maybe we shouldn't plan to have as many parking spots as we used to plan or we have in our current statute for this development. But you know, it's just very layman-like. So where do we have tools that we can say, you know, here's a algorithm, or here's something that we can actually use to get something that's a little research-based?
Yeah, okay, so a couple. So I mentioned ways connected citizens, you know, that's kind of roadway use today, but potentially could show demand on roads in the future. There's a data set, it's private, you have to license it, but many cities have done so, called streetlight data, which looks at, it's anonymized, it looks at pings from mobile phone devices, so it gets you both pedestrian activity but also roadway use in the aggregate. That's another good planning tool. If you have an Esri software package, there's actually a startup that I'm familiar with called Spatial, which looks at the more of the, if I asked you to describe a neighborhood, you'd say, you know, it's fancy, or it's where the bars are, or that's where my kid goes to the playground. They have that type of qualitative data that sits on top of the Esri system, so it can help you look at ways that people in the community think about certain places in a different way. And then the last is, you can't solve this alone. It's going to take community will too. There's a toolkit that a design group and actually some former colleagues of mine put together called the National Street Service, which is an open source toolkit to have conversations about place and road design in a different way. And so it's everything from these little pop-up activities that you can do to say, well, how much is this street tree worth, or the value of this parking space? But it's in a very non-planner way to actually start to have that community conversation. So those would be a couple. And again, I would say, you know, networks of your peers can help you think of others too.
Okay, so we have time for, we'll take the last 3 questions.
I have one more if you don't mind.
Go ahead. You're a planning commissioner. You get 3 more minutes.
Wow, that's more than I expected. It's a bigger question of AI in relation to all of this, because as we're moving faster and faster, people are more and more enraptured in their devices and what things can do, and at the same time, they have less and less trust of the corporations that create the software, that run, that own the devices and the companies. I think of like iRobot, right, where what are you doing going manual in your car? You know, don't you trust the system? You know, the system was going to murder me. So, you know, we laugh about it, and yet there's fundamentally a lack of trust. There's fundamentally a lack of trust in our corporate governance, in our corporate structures, in our public governance. And you see that right now in our world right now, just in the midst of what's going on. So how do we as people get to feel comfortable that we can entrust more and more of what we do, like mobility, to automated and autonomous vehicles?
Yes. So I would say probably one of the areas it starts is with reading the fine print and all the stuff that we sign up for. I'll give you an example. I hate cleaning, and so I wanted one of those robot vacuum cleaners. And I was looking at two brands. One of them, to use the app on your phone, you have to enable location services. And I didn't feel like the maker of that, a robot company to vacuum my floor should know where I am at all times. So I didn't buy that brand. I bought another brand. I don't think most of us, I mean, I'm guilty of it in so many other purchases. We turn those things on and off every day. I think if you look at European regulations, there's a lot more emphasis that I think will come our way in terms of being explicit for us as consumers of those trade-offs that we're making. I'm sharing my location data, or I'm sharing this in favor of this. But I think it's undeniable that the trust has to be earned by the industry. If you think about the recent Boeing crash, there's not a lot of good reason to think that industry is going to self-certify and be safe right now. Automotive is certainly taking that to heart. So there's a real focus on safety standards, but again, I think it does come back to your question of transparency. And my hope is that consumers continue to ask those questions so that when we're actually launching this stuff in the marketplace, you know what you're actually signing up for.
So I'm also a planning commissioner, so my time gets double too. No, but seriously, thank you for coming out. Thank you for all the sponsors. I work for LA Metro, so when you're talking about LA and the problems that they have there, I live it every day, as well as the whole housing market issue in Southern California. I live here in Oxnard, but I commute to the San Fernando Valley 5 days a week. That commute's horrible on the 101, and then you try to use the 118. You made mention in regards to buses running empty through neighborhoods. Some of them do, I won't deny that, and others don't. You also made mention in regards to scooters, the rideshare programs. My concern was the infrastructure, and I'm using LA as the model. The infrastructure is not the best. There's tons of potholes, uneven roads. What are the concerns when it comes to these AV vehicles, you know, driving down the street and it's uneven, and that starts jolting the vehicle. The vehicle starts getting these random shocks that end up triggering them to do something else. You also made mention in regards to one of the vehicles now that kind of signal you like, hey, you're drifting off. I actually experienced that in the vehicle. It kind of freaked me out a little bit because I was like, whoa, I didn't expect it to happen. But, so what's the word in regards to the AVs taking those shots? Second, the jobs that you say that are going to be created, what is the long term on those jobs? I can see those jobs being a high number in the beginning, but like everything else, it's going to dwindle down. But by how much are they going to dwindle down and be permanent long-term jobs? And I'll just leave it at those two.
Okay, good. I'll try and tackle both. One of the things that I learned as I was preparing to come speak with you all is that there's an effort right now to re-envision what the 101 is in the community in terms of HOV lanes, use of the additional space. Maybe there's an additional HOV that you can use for certain hours of the day. I think that's an important question to start. In Michigan, our our governor was actually just elected because of this very question. Our roads are some of the worst in the country. We do not have a good funding mechanism for fixing them. But we also have a number of really sophisticated testing grounds for these autonomous vehicles. And I was joking recently with one of the folks that runs one of these testing centers, and I said, hey, do you have the Michigan Road section to make sure that these autonomous vehicles can drive on something other than perfect, pristine asphalt? And he said, oh yeah, actually we do. So as the companies are starting to develop and test real-world environments, they actually are looking at very challenging operating environments. And the backstory with autonomous driving is much of it actually comes out of an initial research project led by the Department of Defense. And so our armed services are actually looking at autonomous driving today in combat environments. And if you wanted to think about some of the most challenging in the world, I would say those are them. So yes, it's a consideration that's being taken into account. I think the other question was, remind me, the other question was around
Employment.
Oh, employment, yes, and what happens to those jobs? So yes, you're right, particularly for those that are safety drivers. Those will transition over time. We don't have a lot of good data on this topic, and it's something that I am interested in as well. We've looked at the next 10 years. Most of the national employment data looks at historic trends combined with kind of new technology and does some kind of linear projection. I think the challenge here is some of what we're going to see is nonlinear. And so my hope is that there continues to remain a focus on those types of jobs. So if you're a gig economy driver today and you do Uber or Lyft and you become an autonomous safety driver, that there's some plan that the companies and the community partners are working on to help you continue to ease that transition. Again, it's not a foregone conclusion, which is why these conversations are really important at this point in time. And additional research is needed to get really good data on those questions.
All right, I know we're short on time, so I'll try to keep this quick. You've talked a bit about cars, about public transportation, and about walking. I was wondering what role you saw, if any, for human-powered vehicles like scooters, skateboards, and bicycles in the transportation of the future.
Yep, very important, and thank you for bringing it up. I'm a bike commuter myself, in addition to doing those more insane long distances. It's important, and I think really for the community, two reasons. One is, as we think about community health, for those that are able to engage in active transportation, it can actually help reduce healthcare costs, improve that feeling of connection to community from both walking and biking. And we are starting to see communities, and I even noticed some bicycle infrastructure here. The question is there will, to the question earlier, for looking at lane use in different ways and actually allocating to protected lanes. It does not make sense on every through street, absolutely not. And I've seen the opposite happen where you try and put something in and it's not the right place. But the numbers show when you invest in protected bike lanes, it helps the cyclists, brings new people to riding, but others that don't ride might actually use the lane in a different way. There's a road in Detroit that I cross frequently. It's right along the river. The lanes are quite wide and people drive very fast on it. There's a bike lane now, and who uses it also are folks that are in electrified scooters and wheelchairs that didn't have a good option on the sidewalk and were otherwise riding in the street. In community in Arizona where my father lives, they're actually putting golf carts in the bike lanes as well. So there are a number of forms and people that benefit when you invest in that infrastructure.
This question is going to be about reducing or actually eliminating the parking max or minimums for projects. I know just looking at so a lot of these cities that have eliminated parking requirements, they tend to be, they seem to tend to be more like other cities with that traditional grid structure and the slow growth pattern afterward. And then it also tend to have a little bit more of that higher density. So I'm wondering what would be the tools that a newer city, say you take a hypothetical city that grew up in the 1960s, that grew up around the car, the freeway, and everything is ordered around cars, and just the thought of reducing or eliminating parking, the parking requirements is akin to giving up your firstborn child. So what are the tools that planners and elected officials and city managers can have or that can use to try and move in that direction to either be not just eliminate them, but also just kind of reduce it so it's not so burden?
And I've certainly seen in neighborhoods too, if you go to one of those programs, that the neighborhood becomes concerned because, those people from this development will not be parking in my neighborhood. You're actually all neighbors. Let's remember that fact. I would say two things. One is there's the classic transit-oriented development where there's already an existing node in place that residents can rely on. Yes, it requires that folks actually use the service and see the benefit of being located on that place, but that's one that I've seen play out in significantly less dense places. But the others is, again, this if you think creatively, developers are open to all kinds of ways to make their projects pencil. So imagine a world where the development is not on a transit-focused area, but maybe it's a short right-of-way. Could the developer for the first 2 years, 3 years, whatever it takes to make the numbers work, offer a monthly mobility credit that somebody who moved into the property could use in a number of ways? They could use it for bicycles, bike sharing. They could use it for ride sharing to get to transit. They could potentially reimburse one another for carpooling. It's, I think, a question sometimes of the creativity and the will. And then also, being realistic about where those projects make sense in the community and where they don't. And just because, there's a movement toward lower parking minimums, I'm not going to sit here and say no parking minimum in Oxnard is the right thing. Ultimately, those in the room will have to figure that out. But I would say the trend has already started. If you look around the room, ask yourself how any of you are getting around, the chances are you're probably not driving alone every single time anymore. And so if you have a driveway or a garage, you're probably using it differently today than was initially intended, including storing a bunch of stuff that you bought online.
Okay, so I'm going to get the final question. So earlier you talked about how we're in the era of the peak automobile where private ownership of vehicles we're at the height. So how strong is this hypothesis that the automobile as a commodity is slowly going away and it's just going to be, we will hire it for a service? How strong is that hypothesis in that in our lifetime we'll see no need to actually own a car?
Yeah. I think it will be slow, but then it's one of those that we will think we saw happen overnight. And I look at my own experience in this industry. Think about ride sharing. Yes, you hail a vehicle on your app, but one of the points of friction that it actually eliminated was fighting with a taxi driver over whether you were going to get your cash back and how much you were going to tip. It completely vaporized it overnight. But that, along with Netflix and along with so many other things, has started to condition us to use things as a service. You don't buy the operating system for your laptop anymore. You probably pay an annual fee. You probably pay a monthly fee for 3 apps on your phone. We didn't used to do that. And so I think that consumers today, and certainly the next generation, will be much more used to buying things in a fractional way based on use rather than the whole asset. We're already seeing, of course, challenges to home ownership in this way created by debt. So I think that there's a number of macro factors that will continue to push people to start to engage with all kinds of things, including mobility as a service.
So once again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've given us a lot of important issues to consider and also a lot of questions that we need to start asking. My most important takeaway from tonight is I think you were encouraging me to go on field trips
Yes.
to visit other cities. So I hope everyone that's on the record. So let's give her a round of applause. So if you have any burning question for her, I'll let her stay for 2 minutes because we're going to go get pizza. Thank you. And we'll walk to it.